Lisa Garney, and I'm the owner of LNG Construction, and this is Lance Stoddard, who is my senior project manager who oversees estimating, and we are here today to talk to you about trade work, particularly plumbing, estimating, and managing the market, knowing your costs and learning your lessons is the way we decided we would break out this program. And the WBE world and having that certification has without a doubt opened a lot of doors for us, oftentimes closes them as well. So you have to be careful, and I would always advise people that you can never grow a company on it. You can use it as an asset, and it definitely helps, but you can't base your company on it. You still have to provide service, know your trade, know your costs, which is what plays into estimating, is what we're going to talk about, is I think is the number one most important thing you can do in estimating is you got to know what stuff costs. Everything. You have to know your fittings costs, your labor costs, your parts and pieces costs, what your material costs. You have to know what it costs. I talked a little bit about the work we did, and if you want to know more specifically about some of the federal jobs that we went after or had to bid federal work, we can definitely come back around and talk about that. Multifamily is so strong right now, and I know everyone is saying it's falling. The vacancy rates are going up slightly in downtown and Overland Park, but I still see another year of multifamily coming on board. There's a secret sauce to doing multifamily, learning how to build the units. Everything we're seeing right now is unit-based construction, whether it's hotels, senior living, multifamily. We did do some light industrial work with Lockheed Martin, which came off of our federal work at Whiteman Air Force Base, and that was something that personally I was worth traveling for, just because I'm a huge aviation. I follow military aviation, so to get to work on the F-35 project for us was really thrilling with Lockheed and Burns & McDonnell. These are the last year we successfully completed 2 high-rises in downtown Kansas City. Traders on the Grand, which is 11th Grand, and we did that with Block and Sunflower and Titan, and then Arterra that we did with J.E. Dunn, Altus, and Copagan. And those turned out successful. We learned a lot about material management and getting your material and staging is a key, as well as vertical transportation. If you don't have active vertical transportation, it can kill thousands of hours on the job. And to get ready for these jobs, we spent time going to New York and walking high-rise projects that Turner set us up on, actually in New York, because I wanted to see how to do it right. And there's not a lot of high-rises in Kansas City, so there wasn't a lot of opportunity to learn. So we went to New York, we watched how they are doing their high-rise jobs there and how they sequence their crews and the logistics behind it, and it was really a fantastic way to learn. And senior living, this was a job we did with Perrick out on Lee Summit. This is talking through the market. Office, we participated in Cerner under a project labor agreement with J.E. Dunn, and then 46 Penn is a job that LNG is doing right now with McCowan Gordon. That's going to be a new office tower on the plaza, which is fascinating because they went 40 feet down to build a parking garage, and so it's an enormous mass grading excavation project that's happening right now. So our backlog for 2019 is office, multifamily. I see and would like to see us move more toward data centers, logistics, light industrial, just to stay diversified. And I'm going to turn it over to Lance and talk about plumbing and estimating specifically.
Thanks, Lisa. So kind of getting a little bit more, fortunately, Lisa gets to talk about all the real fun stuff. We'll get down to the details, a little bit more of my background, engineering side of it. So kind of thought we'd start by talking about what types of estimates that we have to produce out there, right? There's different kind of contracting that's out there. Kind of starting with probably the highest risk stuff, even as subcontractors, this is probably about, here in Kansas City, I'd say probably about 15% of the market that we look at from an estimating standpoint to design build from a plumbing standpoint. So that obviously has it's a lot different animal than your typical bid build that you got your 100% construction drawings on. You're having to take on a lot more risk with that design build aspects, right? You're going to get conceptual drawings. It's going to be very vague. It's going to have a rough outline of the building. It's going to have how many apartments, occupancy, things like that. And you really rely heavily on your historical data, right? Just not being able to go in there, draw out all the plumbing systems. Yes, you can design the whole thing up front, but then there's a cost benefit, right? You don't have the job yet, so you got to think about time that you have in there. So you got to really look at your historical data. Go back to jobs that you've done previously, or get teamed up with somebody that has done those jobs previously. Obviously, with the design build process, you got to bring on an engineering partner. You're not carrying that in house. So something that building the relationships. Events like this, getting out there, finding out who the engineers you work for on other jobs that maybe you weren't partnered with, but get to know them. That's kind of how you have to go out there to design builds and set up meetings with them to understand what their systems would look like and how you get through that estimating phase. Also, those jobs are very, fixtures are a big part of our world, where most of the money is in the materials. And it can swing, right? On these big jobs, you can be a $500,000 swing in the fixture package, right? So make sure that you're paying attention to what fixtures you're going in on a design build job. Make sure that you're getting very specific in your proposal of what you're carrying, right? So you're up front with the GC, and so you don't have any problem with that later. Bid build is probably 75% of the share that we go after. That's the basic contracting model. They, you get your construction drawings, you bid what's on them, you bid per plan and spec, and you send it out, right? That's pretty typical. And that's what mainly this presentation will be about here moving forward. Like Mike McKean of PPC said, there's kind of some in-between, right? There's some design assist contracts out there now, and you're starting to see you're starting to see more of that come up where the GCs and the ownership are wanting to bring their subcontractors, specifically plumbing's definitely one of the key subs on the job, wanting to bring them into the process early, right? So they can understand where their costs are at and make the best decisions with the engineers, right? Sometimes the engineers got a lot of really good ideas, sometimes not, but sometimes they don't understand what it costs when they ask for something too, right? It can be just a one line item in their spec or in a plan note. And that can be a very substantial amount of money at the end of the day, right? So make sure that they understand what those costs are. So getting started with your estimates, right? First thing, obviously, I'm just going to kind of walk through the basics of processes that we go through at L&G, but make sure you got all the documents you need. Make sure when the ITB comes out that it has everything in there that you're going to need to perform, right? So you got to have your drawings, your specs. Project schedule is always nice. When you're looking at these projects, you got to think about what your workload is, right? What's your manpower look like through the year? A little bit. Now these jobs don't always line up with what they send out at the estimate phase, but it's something that needs to be thought about, right? You're going to have to work overtime on the project. What kind of durations are they giving you? Those things, kind of things that should be going through your head when looking at that project schedule. Project requirements, general requirements. Some jobs, you start talking about getting into federal work or airport work or, stuff that's outside of multifamily private sector. There's a lot of other general requirements out there, right? Whether it's background checks, things like that. So make sure you understand and really look at your general conditions because all those things take time and all cost money, right? So make sure that you're thinking through that. And then pre-bid meetings, right? Make sure that you're looking through there. Make sure you know when those pre-bid meetings are. Some of the jobs not as important to have to go see the site if there's nothing there, but we do a lot of renovation work too. That's very specific to what's currently there. You definitely need to go walk those jobs. Just getting into a little bit more of the detail of your drawings and specs, so things that you really need to pay attention to, obviously plumbing, right, that's why we're here. But the architecturals are a really big part of what we do as plumbers, right? None of the plumbing drawings give you dimensions off any of the walls, right? They don't give you the specifics, they just kind of show you plumbing systems, they don't tell you exactly where everything lays out. And a lot of times, the architecturals don't match the plumbing drawings, right? Not the same engineers developing, you have the architect doing the architectural, and then you have a MEP engineer that does your plumbing drawings, right? There can be conflicts, big conflicts between one and the other. Sometimes you wonder how did this come from the one package, because these guys don't look like they talk at all, right? I mean, it can get pretty rough, and it gets very specific in the bathroom areas, right? So the architecture's got a lot of requirements as far as spacing, everything like that with your ANSI and FHA standards, but you gotta make sure that stuff correlates and make sure you're covering yourself, right? Otherwise, bring up the question, send it in. Make sure you're getting your answers on that before you send your bid in. Structural is always something that really plays into me. Let's go back into, we started talking about lessons learned. I had a job this year that I got a little lesson learned on, right? I had geopiers on it. I don't know how much you guys are familiar with geopiers, but I hadn't really worked around them too much before, and we start digging our trenches, and they're next to geopiers. Geopiers is compacted gravel for the piers instead of your concrete, typical kind of work route. So when you start digging next to those, they have zone influence, and you have to pour flow fill back. So they're really tight structure, right? They're not spaced out very well. That's one thing. Look a little closer at your structural drawings, get your geotech report, right? That could have been a big impact, right? And luckily, we covered ourselves on about half of what we needed there, but just something to look at. Along with that, your structural, especially as you get into the bigger buildings, things like that. You got concrete floors instead of wood floors, things like that. Is there a post-tension floor because it's sitting above a garage? Those things are all very, very critical because you can't core post-tension, right? So you have to put your sleeves in, and they have to be spot on. Otherwise, it is a big, big mess. So, and it's tough to get them all right in the exact same spot, but you want to know about it, right? So that's stuff to look at when you're initially scanning stuff. Starting your takeoff, right? First thing I always like to do is obviously you're going to look at your drawings, right? But then it gets into reading your specs, and each spec section. The plumbing notes on the drawings usually hold a lot of detail, a lot of small stuff that when you add up over a 200-unit apartment job, costs a lot of money, right? It doesn't seem like a big item, but if you completely miss it, you take times 200, and it starts adding up pretty quick. So make sure you're getting into those plumbing notes. Make sure you're reading each of your spec sections as it regards to around your plumbing. And then start breaking it out by system, right? Just like the spec sections have it, it's all broke out by system. Start looking at your drawings and working your way through each type of system and follow that system through the drawings. And then go back to the next system and walk that. Make sure it's all complete, right? I mean, there's plenty of jobs that come out that are supposed to be, it's been through the city, it's for construction drawings, and, I found on jobs that we have a current job downtown that's running off heat exchangers instead of hot water heaters, right? We don't have the heat exchangers. The camp contractors bringing them in. But there was no water supply. They had a research system there. There was no water supply to back the hot water into the heat exchanger, right? Now the pipe had to be run all the way up the building and every floor. Maybe they would have let you change order that in later, but they also, all the general contractors in here know that you guys love writing in those contracts. You're going to provide a complete plumbing system per code, right? Whether the drawings have every little detail in it or not. So, just make sure you're walking through those systems and everything makes sense to you, right? Because along with that, general contractors expect that we know what we're doing, right? We're the ones bringing the expertise to plumbing to the table. So let's make sure that we're communicating with them and letting them know what we're seeing. One thing I want to touch briefly on, and this slide's kind of tagged to electronic takeoff system, just because that's what we use. Definitely you can be doing hand takeoff out there. I'm going to walk through steps whether you're doing it electronically or by hand, all are pretty relevant to how you get there. But one thing, I think that the industry is definitely going to electronic takeoff. I think EPC and Terry, when he was up here, he's talking about that transparency with the ownership, right? And GCs are seeing a lot of that, but they're even, as they're partnering with the key subs, they're going to want to see more of that information. And the electronic takeoff system really allows you to be a lot more transparent, right? Because it is very easy to print off reports, showing everything that you have, quantities, everything like that, and you know, it's very friendly for those types of options. So at LMG, we currently use MVP, estimating with Viewpoint. We used to use FastPipe, great product as well. There's a lot of different ones out there, and I'm not really here to sell you electronic takeoff software. MVP for us is a big advantage, and why we went to it was because it ties directly into our accounting software. So once we get an estimate taken off, we can then go ahead and roll that in. If we win the project, roll it into our accounting software directly, and they talk to each other, and then we're able to be off and running on that job a lot faster. So that was one of the big reasons we went there. But with that, you gotta make sure that people have the right computer setup. Right? It takes some horsepower to run a lot of these estimating softwares. As far as the computer goes, that stuff's getting cheaper, but then also making sure they got the proper amount of screens, things like that. Just the logistics of running that. So once you get there, you get drawings uploaded into your software. It's all about scaling, right? So like I said, a lot of the plumbing drawings don't have dimensions on them. So a good way to do that is get onto your grid lines, make sure you're scaled properly, right? We'll grab a door frame, that's all 3 foot. It doesn't have to be precise with exactly what we do, but it needs to be accurate. So don't forget to make that step, it'll cost you. So also with that, getting annotations and lines in there, right? So as we start doing different systems, right, make sure you're color coding that. Electronic software will color code it separately as you select different systems. But when you're drawing that stuff out, you're going to switch colors, right, when you go from one system to the next. That way when you're going back and looking at your drawings later, it's very easy to pick what you took off, right? And that goes with annotations as well. Because when you're going back, it's easy to go through, count how many bathroom groups you have, add in your labs, add in your toilets. You get halfway, you get interrupted, right? You get a phone call from the field, oh, this is going on, and you just realize you walked through and didn't make any annotations on the drawings, so where the heck did you stop? And now you're starting back over. So just one of those basic type items that I definitely want to make sure that you're putting there on the drawings, and that way you can go back, and somebody else can go back and check your numbers. Right, they go back and you count your annotations on the drawing, see how many of these we have, how much of this, and it just makes the process a lot smoother. That way somebody else can pick it up and run with it in case you're not able to. This is one thing that once you get started, right, it's part about knowing your crew. If you're doing it by hand, you kind of have a lot more in your head of notes from previous jobs. If you're looking at estimating software, right, you got to set your labor factors. So this estimating software, that gives you, it's set at a 1, right? And a 1 is, depending on the software, it's the annual average across the country of, studies that have been done, that this is how long it takes to install stuff, right? Same thing with materials. There's a lot of different ways to get your material pricing, but knowing what your crew does, right? Is your crew faster? Hope so. That's the key to being successful, at least to talk about guys out in the field, but it's knowing what they can do, right? If you get too lean on this factor and think they can do a lot more, it'll get you in a bad spot too. So it's finding that happy medium and knowing what your guys can do, and along with material factors. So really that's getting into estimating software will have material factors as far as your roughing materials preloaded into it. So knowing what that is getting preloaded in and knowing what your buyout with your suppliers are, right? And then you can adjust those factors based on that. And I highly suggest that you have conversations with your suppliers before you start entering that stuff, and understand that you're not going to capture every part of the piece either, right? So don't get too lean on your material pricing. that matches exactly what your suppliers are, because there's always things out there that we have to end up buying a few extra here or there, or something gets broken, things like that. So don't get too lean with that. You want to know where they're coming in. So setting your pipe, right? So hangers and all, how you hang your pipe. So estimating software, it'll have stuff preloaded in there. We found out that our estimating software will preload close hangers for a lot of stuff. So we have to go in, swap it out for some auto grips at times. Make sure, let me tell you, that stuff adds up quick. If you got the wrong hangers in there, it will escalate your price very rapidly. So make sure you're setting that and thinking through that. It's easy to start following those drawings and running the pipe and forget exactly how it's all getting loaded into the system. Installation's another thing. So this is a thing that varies a lot from job to job. Most of it has basic installation requirements in there, but making sure that you're understanding what those requirements are. So a lot of the estimating software, one nice thing about it is you go in there and you preset up your installation, you say, hey, this is how thick your installation is, this is what type we're using, right? It'll auto adjust your hanger sizes for you, right? So, it's larger so that your pipe can fit in those hangers. That's an easy thing to forget when you're running the pipe and you're basing your hanger size off your pipe size, and oh, we got an inch insulation, adds 2 inches to your pipe size, and now it has to go in there. So that's one nice thing that the estimating software will kind of help keep you there, along with the VEs. So your installation is one of the biggest VE packages I find out there. A lot of times the engineer will over-insulate everything, and if there's insulation inside apartment units, I almost guarantee you it'll be one of the first things that comes out in the VE option out of the gate. It's expensive, and in my experience, if you're not running a bunch of copper, or even if you are, I really don't think it's needed in unit. Just don't see the condensation, don't see the flow through there that you do out in the corridors or main lines that can create that condensation. Now, a little bit more dependent if you're talking about centralized hot water system with recircle lines. That's going to become more of an efficiency type thing, and get the engineering owner more involved because it's a long-term efficiency of running the system. Another really nice thing about the estimating software is it kind of adds in your miscellaneous materials, right? Stuff. So if you're doing your hand takeoff, you still got to capture all this stuff. Right here we're showing this is 100 feet of 2-inch copper pipe. You can't see all the details there, but you can see how many line items are in there. That's how many line items when you run 200 feet or 100 feet of copper pipe is populated into the estimating software. Right? It's got your hangers, it's got your flux, it's got all the miscellaneous parts and pieces, it's got your roll thread. Everything that you're going to need to run that pipe is already automatically put into that estimate. Right? So it's a big advantage to using the software, helps speed things up. But if you're doing hand takeoffs too, this is definitely stuff that you have to be keeping track of. If this is copper, but if you're running PVC, it includes your glue, your primer, all that miscellaneous materials that you're going to need to get that pipe installed. Create assemblies, whether you're doing this in a computer program or by hand, I think is very important. A lot of stuff that we do is a lot of repetitive type items, especially as you come out of the wall on your stub ups, right? You can really preset a lot of your assemblies. So if you got a toilet, you preset your whole toilet assembly, or your labs. Right here is one of our laboratory assemblies. Just the line items of everything that goes in there, so that when you go around and count up how many labs you have, right, automatically populates all the materials that way. One, by sitting down and doing that, creating your assemblies, you get a lot more accurate with your takeoff as well, right? Because you don't have to sit there and think every time you come up to the lab what every part and piece you need is, right? It's easy to forget one part here or there, but if you take the time to create that assembly and really think through every part and piece, you know that it's solid, it's just more accurate takeoff, right? This is a great way of getting your field guys involved as well, right? Bring your foreman in, have them work with you on these, because not everything's plumbed the same, not every foreman likes to see things the same way. We like to stay as uniform as we can, and some jobs don't allow for it, so get their opinion, especially when you're starting the jobs out. Have them look at the items and what they see Because there's definitely stuff guys have experienced out in the field to see that you know, not all of us do. Okay, so one project, multiple takeoffs. I think from a subcontractor standpoint, I know GCs go through it as well. I don't know how many times we take off the same project, right? You know, from the time we get budget, they're trying to get budget numbers for a project to the point where we actually go out and build the thing, right? I mean, I can tell you that we've chased a handful of jobs for over a year, probably estimated it 3 or 4 times. It's just kind of where the market's going. You know, the owners, architects have this, you know, I don't want to say it's a, you know, a dream world per se, but sometimes they're putting numbers in there. Maybe they're, you know, from previous jobs, they're a little bit older or whatever, but the prices come up high, right? So then we're being options, right? Or they have to re-engineer the whole building to, you know, get inside their budget, right? Because it's all got to make sense for them as well. And multiple estimates, more time. What this software allows you to do is go in there and change specific items, right? Great VE option is go from copper to PEX pipe, right? That's an item that we can do in 5 minutes. We can go in, select our domestic water lines inside our units, and turn that into PEX pipe instead of copper, right? And that number's done. So becoming efficient with knowing of what you're going to have to go back and change at times, right? Or looking at your VE options ahead of time and talking to GC, hey, are these things that you guys would be interested in us putting in our bid, so that you know up front. You know, a lot of other times as well, it gets back to knowing your client too. And I'll get into a little bit more of that down the slide, but knowing you start working with GCs consistently, or owners, and what do they want, what do they expect, right? And so learning and understanding what they're needing, right? Some GCs want the absolute cheapest price, right? So show me all your VEs. Some jobs and owners, they want per plan and spec. So making sure that you understand that process before you get too far down the line in your estimates is important. Otherwise, you're just creating yourself a lot of rework. So, one thing out there, and I know we're all aware, labor pricing. So, making sure that you understand your fully loaded labor rate, right? And so, I mean, if you're the owner of the business, or a project manager, or just an estimator, knowing what that full labor rate is, right? So that's either going back to your books and understanding what the cost to hit the job after the facts are, or what your guys are costing you. Go get with your financial controller or your accounting side. Just make sure when you're loading all those rates that you have everything included in those dollars per hour, right? Overtime, we talked about this briefly. Understanding the project, understanding your crew. How many guys is it going to take up front? You know, when we do these takeoffs in the system, and you set your labor factors initially to that 1, every time you take off a piece of material, right, it adds time, adds man hours to the job. So when it's doing that, it's calculating the man hours for the hourly rate you put in. All right, so making sure that you understand if there's going to be overtime needed, or you know, if you don't have a full, if you don't have enough guys when it kicks out those man hours, do we have enough guys to do the job, or am I going to have to work overtime because I got a smaller crew? We can be more efficient that way, and I can burn less man hours, but we're going to have to work some overtime to get there. We're going to have to work overtime just to meet the project schedule. Those are all things that you want to think about when you're putting your estimate together, when you're thinking about labor pricing. You know, it's a huge part of what we do in plumbing, right? Most of it, probably the biggest cost we have is labor, right? Right there, material. Materials and labor are pretty neck and neck. Usually, labor edges out, depending on how fancy fixtures you get. But one of the biggest items that we have. And then understanding your crew, right? With small companies out there, you know, probably out there working with your guys, it's easy to know exactly what each of your employees can do. If not, you need to get out in the field, right? If you're the estimator and you haven't had a lot of time out in the field, you get out there, right? Talk to the guys, talk to your superintendents that are out in the field watching this work. Talk to your foreman and understand your crew. You know, that's how you become more competitive. You gotta have a crew that can perform. But knowing what they can do is more important in my opinion, because you gotta get the right price in your estimate. Along with the labor pricing, right? Everybody knows that there's a shortage of labor coming out there. So being able to transition employees that don't have a plumbing background, you know, Lisa touched base on it with us, that the training is such a big focus for us this year. It's actually one of our initiatives for the year, is to make sure that we're providing, as an open shop company, the proper training for our crew. Because there's not this line out our front door of qualified plumbers. I know it's hard to believe, but it doesn't happen. So making sure that we can take guys that don't have a lot of plumbing experience and get them trained is key, right? And ABC helps provide courses for plumbing and working all the avenues you have to establish that program, right? We're really working this year on trying to develop something in-house that kind of has our apprentice to journeyman to foreman level. We get classes scheduled. You know, it's just some internal training, but making sure that we're touching base with all our people and understanding where they're at. That'll be directly tied to, you know, some in-the-field training. Making sure they're getting their hours in there. Not just throwing a person in there that has no idea what they're doing, right? There's a lot of consequences in the plumbing world to having somebody that doesn't know what they're doing. Water is a very detrimental resource, right? One pipe busts and runs, you know, for 30 minutes, and you have a lot of damage on your hands. Especially if that project's in a point where it's getting ready to close out. It just costs a lot of damage, a lot of time. So we've got to make sure that people are qualified to do what they do. Material cost. So, you know, this chart here I thought was pretty interesting, that, you know, states material costs are rising faster than bid prices. So what that tells me is that we're probably not keeping track of our estimates properly, right? Are we communicating with our vendors? Are we staying out in front of construction escalation costs? Got to keep that in mind, as some of these jobs that we bid initially can be 6 months out, a year out, right? Make sure you're thinking about your material escalation. I mean, same thing goes with labor. I mean, everything has escalation the further out it gets. Make sure that you understand that and incorporate it into your material pricing, right? Talk to your vendors. There's a reason that your vendors, when they send you a bid, it says, this bid's only good for 30 days, right? Because they're not guaranteeing to pass that. And I'll tell you what, if you don't have something very similar on your bid, you're, you know, not a good idea. Because those GCs, they're out there, a lot of them ask for 90 days. And, you know, a lot of them work with you on that, but it just makes that conversation a lot harder if not up front. If you can get out in front of those material escalations, you got to be careful too, right? Because you got to stay competitive, right? And that gets into the next line item I have here, that's tariffs. This last year, tariffs have been quite a thing. It's really been a ride on what our material pricing is going to be and how that's going to come in. And you know, the only thing, I don't know what exactly is going to come out of the tariffs, right? It's above me. But one thing I do try to get into our proposals is, you know, write a line item in there, right? I mean, we know that there could be a 10% escalation pricing on materials coming from China, right? So talk to your suppliers. Well, all our materials come from China. Hey, most of your fixtures do, right? Whether they're assembled over there, maybe not. Some parts and pieces in there probably do. So make sure you understand what part of your material could hit those tariffs. And, you know, if that 10% hits, you know, a lot of times I'll put a line item in our proposal that says, hey, if these tariffs hit, it's out of my control, and here's a line item adder, right? Because I don't want to put it in my overall bid price, because, right, that can price me right out of the gate, right? So be upfront as much as you can. Everybody likes transparency, and, you know, they'll appreciate it. Sometimes they don't like the cost, but they'll at least appreciate the honesty and being upfront about it. I mean, not a lot we can do when it comes to tariffs. The other thing with material costs, I get multiple quotes. I'm a big believer in making sure get 3 quotes for everything, right? You know, we definitely have suppliers that we utilize pretty frequently, but you know what? It's because they come in low, right? or they do a really good job of support for us. When we need something, they're always there. We don't catch everything that we need all the time. Sometimes I need something rushed in. Fortunately, I forgot it, right? The field guy's like, I told you about this 2 weeks ago. I'm like, yeah, well, I forgot, right? So they work with us. So, there's part of that goes in there that, your relationships with your suppliers is probably one of the biggest things when it comes to your material pricing, right? Have good relationships with them. They'll talk through. I mean, they're the experts in this that, a lot of them have people out there that do nothing but study the material escalation and what's going on with the tariffs. And so pull that information from them. They have the knowledge, so don't be bashful about sitting down with them and talk to them about it. Historical data. We talked about this a little bit there when we were looking at design builds, but really establishing your historical data based on previous jobs you have. Right? There's nothing that's any better. Some might say, this is really priceless information that your company has, right? Because it's with your people, right, that are out there doing your work, and you just can't get software that can tell you what your historical data is, right? Because it's all dependent on how you guys do things as a company. So establishing that data and taking care of it, right? So finishing up a job, I think we're talking about estimating. When you finish up a job, get it closed out, getting all those costs in a format that you can easily go back and look at when you're bidding the next job that's very similar to it, right? You have that data, it can be as easy as an Excel spreadsheet, that has the big header items that you can drop all your jobs into. That way you can go across the page and just do a comparison when you're putting your estimates together. Make sure nothing's outside the realm of some of your past history, or can we get a little bit leaner on this job based on how we performed on the last one, or hey, maybe I need to put a little bit more on this one because the last job we did like this cost us a little bit more. Really helps leverage the previous bids, and what studying your historicals will expose your shortcomings, right? What items did you miss last time that's getting you here, right? Where are we not as productive out in the field as we should be? Maybe we need to go concentrate a little bit more on that to get the right numbers in the estimate. So really, it builds a competitive advantage. So really think about how you can draw that historical data. It's all different for different size companies and different size projects. There's a million different ways you can get there, but really start thinking about that. So when I'm reviewing estimates going out the door, these are some of the items I definitely want to walk through, right? Lisa talked about it with high rises. One of the biggest things is material hoisting, right? Whether that's a high-rise building or whether it's a 3-story wood structure, you probably don't want to haul all those toilets up the stairs, whether it's 3, 4 stories. You don't want to do it, right? So you got to think about how we're going to get that material up there. Is the GC going to carry a forklift on the site? If not, I need to carry it for a couple weeks to get those materials up on those upper levels, right? Or if it is a high rise, they're going to provide exterior buck hoist on the building that we're going to be able to utilize. Are they going to have interiors? The higher the building, the more critical that gets, right? Those things need to be manned by the GCs, and those are conversations that you just want to have up front. Just talk to them about what is going to be provided, and the high-rise stuff really pushes that all the trades are going to need it, so it makes sense for the GC to carry, but understanding what they are carrying and what they're going to provide is an important part of what we do. Rock excavation, right? Typically, long companies are not set up to do rock excavation, so you got to understand it. It's a good item in there in your proposal to make sure you have in your exclusions, unless you know about it, specifically says it's going to be rock, and the GC says you have to carry it, right? Then you need to go start reaching out, right? Go talk to the big civil contractors that have the right equipment to do that rock excavation, and get a sub number for them to do the digging on the job for you, right? So just think through that, make sure the rock excavation is a big deal. That adds up quick. Sales tax, right? It's a tax exempt job or not. So just make sure that's a good item to be checking. Prevailing wage, obviously that's going to vary your project a lot. Those two items there, they're just big swings, right? It's usually just a click of a button that you make all those changes, and it's easy to forget. So making sure that you have that down and you're checking it on each job and understanding it's a big deal. Bonding, right? As a subcontractor, bonding's always, it's kind of back and forth. Some GCs and owners want you to bond, others don't, right? So understanding if they're going to want that bond, either get it in put it in an add-all. Make sure you have the bonding for the job, right? Make sure you can get bonded. Subcontracts, so any subcontracts that you're going to have in the job, right? So, there's a lot of different avenues that you can sub out different things. It's kind of depending on what you got, what makes sense for your company. Insulation could be one of those items. Fire stop. Fire stopping is probably an item that probably talk about a little bit more. It's only becoming a bigger deal now, and specifically in your multifamily world, it's huge, right? I mean, they're bringing in third-party inspectors now on a lot of the jobs to verify that fire stop's installed properly, even before your city inspector comes in, right? So make sure you understand what the fire stop requirements are, because it can get pretty expensive pretty quick, right? So not always a bad thought to maybe look at something like that out, and somebody that does it every day. They're obviously running the business too, and they're staying competitive. A lot of the stuff that you're thinking about subcontracting, you gotta look at your labor force, right? That's another avenue. If you're short on labor, right, there could be items that you could subcontract out to help with that. Contingency, right? Where's your risk on the job, right? You've done a job like this before, right? So understanding your risk ties directly to your contingency. So make sure that, whether you're creating a contingency fund or you have some fluff in some other areas, I guess, it doesn't really matter how you get there, but make sure you understand your risk on a job. That's something that when you're estimating, that's the one time you get to analyze risk and put money towards it. Right? After, when the estimate's in and it's done, now you're just dealing with it. So make sure you understand your risk on a job. It's very common practice out there. Everybody understands there's a lot of risk in what we do. The weather that we've seen over the last 2 months, like 2 ground roughs going in right now, can't always predict that stuff, right? So make sure you're covering yourself, and this is the time to do it. And then your overhead markup, obviously. So make sure you understand what your operating costs are. Everything, all your directs, all that stuff, very important that's going into the estimate, but understand what it takes for you to run your business. What overhead do you have in there? What office expenses? You gotta run payroll. Make sure that you're getting all that cost into your overhead number and you fully understand that. It's important. A lot of the big companies, right, they'll have rates that they send out, and everybody knows they have professional accountants and all the stuff that goes along with it that take care of that. Small businesses, right, gotta go figure that out and make sure you're covered there. And obviously, we're all here to make money, so make sure you get markup in there. And part of that is understanding the market, right? What will the market allow right now? So you just gotta do your research on that. That gets into proposals. Your proposal, I think you should have a set proposal template, especially in the plumbing world, right? We do a lot of the same stuff, so have all this stuff documented down. There's lots of things in your proposals that are the same every job, right? Every job, I exclude rock excavation, is one of the things, right? Just make sure you got a standard template. I would suggest getting it out there. That way you're not having to, this is the last thing that you think about, right? You're getting down to the crunch time. I gotta get this estimate in, right? I got all the numbers together, and oh crap, I got to put together the whole proposal, inclusions, exclusions, all that stuff, right? You're down under the gun, you forget something, right? Happens all the time. So have your template there, ready to roll. Obviously, there's going to be all your inclusions, all your exclusions, huge deal. All right, make sure you're upfront as much as you can be about what you included in the job, including your material, type of materials you used, right? And all the specifications tell you what type of materials you you're supposed to use, but not all specifications are all that clear. Right? There's some room for interpretation in a lot of those specifications, so just make sure that you mark that out. And then identify some project-specific items, right? So each job has very specific items that need to be included. And then if there's any specified GC bid documents, right? Try to get out in front of those. And, they appreciate it. They have to analyze a lot of subcontractor numbers, right? So the more standard format they can get it back in. You really don't want the GC pissed off at you right out of the gate, right? You just go try to figure out what all your numbers are at. They have a bid form, try to fill it out the best you can. Real briefly, I'm going to talk about just cost coding. This isn't necessarily tied directly to estimating, but I think it's a big deal to get that historical data that we were talking about earlier, right? Making sure you're breaking down your cost codes. That way you can really understand where your costs are going, right? And that feeds directly into your historical data, which only allows you to compare better from estimate to estimate, right? You're able to track the cost, you're able to get that historical data, and it helps a ton, right? There's a little bit of a disadvantage that it takes time, right? It's going to take administrative time to get your cost codes breakdown. So you got to understand that. And there's always a cost benefit analysis, right, that goes into everything. So depending on company size, what kind of stuff you're doing, I would suggest, just looking at it and seeing if it makes sense for you. So I would touch quick on what we see as qualities of good estimators. Lisa touched base on it earlier, knowing your costs. All right, that's the biggest thing is your estimators putting together all the costs that it takes to build something, right? So in order to do that, you got to know what it is. Talk about crew production, attention to detail, right? We talk about making sure those specs, the plan notes that are in them, gotta be in the details to be a good estimator. A working knowledge of plumbing systems, right? There's nothing better than, there's a lot of companies out there, you get, somebody that's been out in the field before, right? Done the installation. They can make really good estimators. So think through that when you're looking at estimators and what you're wanting. For us, if you're doing takeoffs, maybe this isn't as big a deal, but being efficient with a computer, probably either way, whether you're using electronic takeoff software or not, whether you're probably using Excel, you got to use some kind of computer at this day. So make sure that it can be efficient with that. Staying organized and asking questions when they need to, right? You got to be upfront with you. The last thing you want in an estimator is someone that's think they know but not sure and just move forward. Right? Don't want that, right? Want them to raise questions if they got them. I thought we'd touch base here a little bit on some lessons learned that we have. I would start by saying an estimating checklist, right? If you don't have one, you should get one. There's a lot of stuff to remember when you're putting together an estimate. If you don't have something that you can go back and reference and check off the list and make sure it's accurate, then you're really setting yourself up for a bad deal. Material selections, right? Going out running the whole job in the wrong material type, right? Or running cast iron, right? Your spec called for heavy duty couplings and you went in with standard couplings, right? That's a big swing in money. Just things like that. Understanding your material, what you're picking, and making sure it meets your specs. Know your client. We talked about this earlier when you put together an estimate. Know what their needs are, right? Are they wanting per plan and spec? If you propose on something that's not plan and spec, some GCs prefer, right? They want to know, how can we get this price down? Some GCs or some owners want what is on the drawings and what's in the specifications, right? You might disqualify yourself right out of the gate by going with something that's not. Equipment needs for your project, right? You own the equipment. Did you get that price in there? Are you having to rent equipment? Making sure that you got all that covered, or you get fuel costs in there, things like that. And inclusions and exclusions. We get back to that on building the proposal, but it's a huge deal on understanding what you included and what you excluded. It's a lot easier when you're going back to negotiate that final contract with with the GC or, you know, or some of your cases, the owner, if you can state right here, hey, I excluded that, right? So there's going to be a cost increase. And, you know, I was trying to be upfront with it. But if you don't have anything in there, they're going to assume you had it. So just make sure we're thinking through those type of items. So with that, any questions out there for myself or for Lisa?
I got a question for you. So you said that guys that have been out in the field or gals that have been out in the field tend to make really good estimators, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. But what's your approach for training somebody who hasn't been in the field and put that work in place themselves? And how do you walk through that? Because that's kind of an abstract concept if you haven't done it.
Yeah, for sure. And a lot of times, a lot of our estimators are coming out of school a lot of times, right? You know, when I was coming out of school, you know, I started in estimating right initially, and they had somebody that had been doing it for 20 years, right? Mentoring me, making sure I didn't screw anything up. We don't all have that advantage. The other side of it is if any way possible, if you can get them out in the field, right? And, you know, spend some time out there with their foreman. The other side of that is the checklist, right? There's processes in there of having a written procedure for how we do takeoff. Something that they can take and walk through. You know, they're not going to have all that necessarily install knowledge, things like that, but, you know, the bit more information you can give them, you know, from a checklist to, hey, this is the steps I need you to walk through, it's just going to help minimize your risk of, you know, somebody that hasn't been out there and done it for 20 years. It's just providing them as much detail as you can, and, you know, it takes time to develop those documents. You know, it takes somebody that's knowledgeable too and willing to do it. You know, that stuff's important. If you have anything on that, Lisa.
My thought would be for us to put them in the field, right? Because they have to know production. And when you look at an electronic takeoff, or you've got a guy doing it by hand, you see there's one thing that we touched upon here as part of the managing the market conversation is the difference in estimating a military job versus an office job versus multifamily. You know, multifamily senior living hotel really kind of stay together as unit type construction. That's completely different than office, light industrial, or data center. And so if you don't have an estimator that knows the production rate of his crew, he needs to get out in the field and learn what that is. There's got to spend time in the field. And I think that goes for our industry as a whole. I mean, we're very lucky to be doing what we're doing, because from my point of view, I see fewer and fewer people that actually know how to build something, that actually spend time in the field and know how to construct something. So I think the biggest thing we can do is continue to develop people that know construction, that know how to build something, and know how to make water produce clean, potable water, run electricity. I mean, it's a great value that we're bringing to society, that we know how to do what we're doing, and so I think the biggest thing you can do is put guys in the field and learn production rates of the crew. When I was starting construction, I said to my dad, how are you successful in construction? He said two things. He said, get to know your suppliers and treat them well and pay them on time. Because there's really nothing that differentiates us, right? We're all bidding the same stuff. You know, with LBA, we're bidding against the same stuff. So, you know, we have to know either our crews have to be more efficient, and the way, at least my dad did it, was he had a crew out and he'd say to Slim, he'd say, hey, can you put in 200 feet of pipe today? And Slim said, yeah, I can do it. Slim did it. So then my dad said, okay, tomorrow I want you to put in 300. And Slim did it. You've probably heard this story a million times. He did it, so we gave him a case of beer, right? And then, you know, the next day he gave him 2 cases of beer because Slim and his crew put in 400 feet of pipe. So you got to know what your crew can produce, incentivize them to produce more, and then develop good relationships with your suppliers so you can get the best costs. Because we're all buying the same stuff. And And so I think those are two important key things. Any other questions?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Do you use your WBE mostly in the federal market, and do you have to travel?
It's a great question. She asked if our women-owned business certification was used in the federal market and if we travel. In the federal market, I found that I'll say for all certifications, if any of your companies hold certifications, they're only as good as they are enforced. So if it's something that is not enforced, then mostly you'll find people don't necessarily utilize it. At the federal world, the woman business certification is not as highly set aside as a few other classes, which are 8A, Hub Zone, and the veteran-owned business. There is some set-asides for women-owned, but it has to be under particular NAICS codes, and it has to be under a certain dollar value. And I just found that the woman-owned wasn't something necessarily used at the federal level. When we were doing federal work, it was as a Hub Zone contractor. And we did have to travel. And I had a note when Lance was talking about estimating your crew costs and looking at prevailing wage versus other wages. And travel would be definitely something you'd have to take into consideration if it's a job and you're going to have to travel. And or if crew is short in Kansas City and you got to bring in travelers is another cost that you have to consider.
So where do you use your WBE?
So WBE,
State level?
WBE is not state, WBE is city. So I have found that certifications are three classes basically. They're in Kansas City, Missouri level, which is an MBE or a WBE certification. At the state level, it's a DBE certification under MoDOT, KDOT, ODOT, usually under the Department of Transportation. And then at the federal level comes the 8A, the Hub Zone, the veteran-owned, and some small business certifications, small business set-asides at the federal level. So they're really at three different levels. And Kansas City is one of, I'd say, 4 cities across the country that does have an actively enforced NWBE program. So it's harder to get. It's harder to get the certification because it's enforced. Now, generally, I think the two go hand in hand. The more something's enforced, the harder it is to obtain.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
With your federal bidding and estimating,
Yes.
do you try to mark a percentage up in your markup just because it's a higher risk? You want more specifications that they require and everything else as well?
He's asking about federal work and higher specifications within the contracts and if you can mark up that risk. Answer, hopefully, the real answer, market dependent and competition dependent. And what's the bidding pool look like? Because and what you're building too would play into that. When we were bidding federal work, we were partnered with a larger general contractor, and so we were bidding it, and we were marking up our work at a federal contractor margin. GCs have smaller margins than subs because they're taking less risk because the risk is passed down to the sub. So it depends on if you're bidding as a GC or a sub, but typically there's going to be higher level specification, more quality control, more checkpoints on a federal job than on a local job, so I would build that into your estimate.
The other thing to do there, instead of maybe just marking up, is you gotta look at your production rate, because that's where it's really gonna hit, right? There's gonna be more inspections that could happen. There's gonna be more, scrutiny due to those higher quality standards. So when you're setting your labor factors, I think you gotta look at it at that point, right, as well, and not just maybe catch it in markup per se, but that's really true cost, right? If you have higher standards, more inspections, all that stuff requires time. It's going to slow your production rates down a little bit. So just trying to understand that as much as you can and trying to get it in there as well.
I might touch on just a few things that are important, I think are interesting and important. I'm fascinated by the ability to provide water, this resource, and it's great. I love that we are plumbers and able to do that. And globally, water scarcity is a problem. It's causing a mass refugee crisis. And what Black and Beach and Guardian are doing in providing water and investing in infrastructure programs, I think is amazing. And so I applaud you guys for doing that. And I think that the market right now is strong for all of us in Kansas City. There's a lot of work, and that may change, and there's some predictions that may change over the next 5 to 6 years. And when and if that happens, what I'm hoping is that the country sees an infrastructure bill, because we strongly need one. I mean, our infrastructure is rapidly declining. And my preference last year, I love that we had the Tax Reform Act, but I think an infrastructure bill would have been something better, better for our economy. It would knock all of us off our feet. There'd be so much work if there was an infrastructure bill. So I think it's something we can all prepare for. At LMG, we have always tried to stay diversified. I mentioned in the beginning when we started out and I earned my master plumber's license and then took a step back and we got into military contracting because that was the market at the time. And now we've built upon and we're growing our skills and becoming better quality control for plumbing in the Kansas City market, but always staying diversified. Last year we spent time, we had a job when we were doing military work pouring the runway at Whiteman Air Force Base for 6 years. And so we learned concrete. So we took that to the next level last year and we became certified to manufacture concrete. And that's something that I think we might grow into, especially if the country gets an infrastructure bill, there might be more need for that. And with the airport coming too, we saw that as a long lead item, something that we could be ready for with KCI. So that's something that we're looking, that we're involved in. Lance mentioned on engineering. I think it's something important. We learned doing the high-rise structures over 4 stories. Code is silent on use of material over 4 stories. And it's really interesting that it doesn't touch upon drain, waste, and bin and water supply on higher-rise buildings. And we found that the engineers were not always the first to want to exactly specify the material for your drain, waste, and bin for your water supply. And some of it was falling back on us, or they were missing heavy-duty couplings on the higher-rise buildings. So you've got to know your trade, right? You can't always rely on the engineer to necessarily get everything right, especially on a type of product that's not off the scene in our community. Know your contracts. I know it's a tough thing to do, but know your contracts. And I'd say quality control, we touched on that. The speech I give every year at Christmas is the Al Pacino, from any given Sunday, life is made up of inches. And it's true for us as plumbers, maybe for the electricians in the room too. I mean, you have dry fitting, especially on a multifamily, when there's 10,000 fittings, it can be catastrophic. Your water can quickly cause a lot of problems. So you have to have quality control, check every fitting, especially for the drywall, because that's the quality control is a huge thing that we've had to learn from. Learn from your mistakes. I mean, I always look at other people and say, how were they successful? But I also look at the bigger guys and say, okay, what mistakes did they learn, and how could we learn from those and not make them ourselves? You got a good estimate, and then you get the job. Don't forget to follow up with your work and process reports and track your job cost coding and the job financially as it gets going. Like Lance said, with that historical data, it's critical. So you can't just get the job, you got to follow up and track your costs as the job is progressing. One maybe last thought is I mentioned on asking questions. Have a curious mind, especially for those of you that might be young within a company. I think one of the greatest traits of a future leader is curiosity. And I would encourage everyone to always be curious about what it is you're doing, who you're working for, while you're doing it, and have an intention. have an intention of why you're doing what you're doing. If you want to be the best plumbing company, your intent is to be the best plumbing company, best GC, best supplier, best electrical provider, then have an intention to do good work, and the rest usually falls into place. Any further questions? Really appreciate y'all being here. This is our first time to give a presentation, so we weren't sure how it was going to go. We hope we provided some interesting information. But I really appreciate everyone coming to hear us. We spent some time trying to pull this together, so thank you all for being here.